Welcome everybody. My name is Christian Hyatt. I'm the co-founder of Risk 360, and with me I have our president of services and also our co-founder Christian White. And today we're going to cover what we call the best introduction to SOC 2, and we'll add the word ever. And the goal of today's presentation is really just for anyone trying to learn about the framework. Maybe you're beginning your journey and you want to know why customers are asking you about SOC 2. This should be the one video you can watch to really get prepared for why that's happening. We also have 4 other parts to this series where we'll break down the framework in further detail. So check out our YouTube and you can see all of that. So to get us started here, let's move over here. What we'll cover today is we'll talk about the basics of SOC 2, just what it is, who governs it, why do you might need SOC 2. We'll talk about a business case for SOC 2. So why does your organization need to get this? Why are customers asking for it? Then we'll walk through the steps to achieve SOC 2 compliance, a typical timeline so you can do some backwards planning. We'll talk about efforts and break down who is involved in a typical SOC 2 engagement, and then we'll provide a brief framework overview. So CW, maybe you can kick us off here. What is SOC 2?
Yes, thanks. So SOC 2, what is it? It's a reporting framework. So I would describe that as opposed to a security framework. It's not inherently a security framework. It's a reporting framework. The AICPA is the entity that governs it, keeps it up to date, makes changes as necessary, and the really SOC 2 reporting scheme that they've put together is a way for companies called service organizations to communicate their security story and give third-party assurance to their key vendors, auditors, other third parties, customers. And so it's really become a third-party assurance mechanism, especially for SaaS companies, but not necessarily limited to those. So that's kind of some of the background. And if you go way back, it used to be called SAS 70 reporting. It's had a few iterations since then. The most recent change to the actual framework happened in 2017, 2018, where we now have the trust services criteria, which are updated as of 2017 to align with the COSO framework, if you're familiar with that. That's a lot to say something simple, but that's kind of the background.
Yeah, and just a few nuances I'll throw out there for folks who haven't been exposed to SOC 2 before. It is governed by the AICPA, so that's the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And what you might be thinking is, well, that's not a security organization, and that's right. So as we dive into the framework, we talk about concepts. A lot of it isn't intuitively security related, so we went through the efforts of translating that. SOC 2 covers a specific scope, so sometimes companies will ask us, does it have to cover the whole organization, or can it cover a certain product? It can be specific. There are 5 trust services criteria. So security, which SOC 2 calls the common criteria, is a mandatory one, and then you can add the other 4, which is availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. SOC 2 is not, unlike other frameworks, if you're familiar with like PCI or NIST, that has a very prescriptive set of requirements. SOC 2 is a flexible framework that you can customize. We'll talk a little bit about that. So you can maneuver SOC 2 to be custom to your specific environment and control set. And ultimately, what you get out of a SOC 2 is not a certification. You get a really long report, usually about 100 pages. And that's what your customers want from you. They want that insight and that report. That'll give us into the business case. So why are your customers asking for SOC 2? Probably that's how this landed in your lap. An executive or a customer or someone said, hey, we need to get a SOC 2 report. There's 3 primary reasons that we're seeing that happen. The first primary reason that companies try to get SOC 2 is they want to build a better risk management program, or they want to use SOC 2 as a basis for security. The reason that is coming up is because if you look at any of the data, third parties are becoming more and more responsible for key business processes, which means that third parties, if they have a security incident, it can negatively impact your business. So as a business, you want some assurance that third party is doing the right things. And SOC 2 is a way to get visibility into, is your third parties doing the right things? So you can use SOC 2 as a framework to push risk management in your organization. aligned to security best practices that are audited and gives you something to report to the board. SOC 2 is a great mechanism to do that. The second reason that you're probably doing SOC 2 is because your customers are making you do it. You're probably being asked to fill out security questionnaires. There's security requirements in contracts. Maybe during the sales process, customers are asking a lot of really hard security questions, or in fact asking for a SOC 2 report directly. So your business needs to get a SOC 2 report to access those customers, and it's a mandatory requirement. SOC 2 is becoming more and more ubiquitous in that tens of thousands of companies at this point get SOC 2 reports, so it's kind of table stakes to enter certain marketplaces. And the last reason many of our customers are getting SOC 2 is they want an ability to demonstrate compliance across multiple frameworks that otherwise does not have a formal reporting mechanism. One of the most common is HIPAA. So I need to be HIPAA compliant, but I don't have a good way to demonstrate HIPAA compliance. There's no HIPAA certification. So I can get a SOC 2 report, align it to HIPAA. It's a set of audited controls, and I can demonstrate HIPAA compliance. You can also do the same thing with other non-certification regulatory requirements. GDPR is a popular one, for example. And ultimately, those are the three reasons. Is there anything you want to add to that, CW? Any other reasons that you're seeing customers need to get SOC 2?
I think those are the big ones, but one thing I'd emphasize is especially for companies who have not built a security program in the past, while SOC 2 isn't a security framework, and it's more governance, although it does cover security and other topics we'll get into, it is a great baseline for building a security program because it covers everything that you need in a security program, such as governance, risk management, communication, monitoring, access, like all the stuff that you would want in a security program. SOC 2 has that. And then also the fact that you mentioned you can customize the controls to fit your environment means that you really can create a good security program that's bespoke to your environment from the ground up. So I think more so than a lot of other frameworks, SOC 2 provides that flexibility.
Yep. And if you guys want those details, check out videos 4 and 5 in this series. They're called like framework overview. You can look it up in YouTube, and we'll have those out there. We'll talk about the framework in detail. So I'll cover the 4-step process, CW, and that I'd love it if you could cover the timeline coming up. So generally speaking, the process to obtain a SOC 2 report involves 4 steps, especially if you're a year 1 client. So what we like to do is start off with planning. And that seems like a weird place to start. But the reason that is so important is because there's a few things we have to do to have a successful SOC 2 report. One, we need to understand the scope of your environment. That's essential to paring this down to something that makes sense. And the way you scope a SOC 2 report typically is to think through what your customers want to see, because the report ultimately wants to speak to those customers. So during a planning session, we'll think through that. Which markets do you serve? Who's going to be reading the reports? What do they want to see in the report? Make sure it's scoped appropriately. And then also in planning, you want to do other things like customize your control set. So let us hear from you about what processes you have in place, what tools and technology and security you already have in place, and align the SOC 2 report to that, to your environment. We'll also do other things like set up status reporting cadences, building project plans, getting on the same page, defining what success looks like. All that stuff happens during planning, and it really should not be skipped. Step 2 is we'll do a readiness assessment. So most organizations, especially year 1, they don't have a good sense for where they're at. Are they really close to being SOC 2 compliant, or are they really far away? So what we will do is we will do a gap assessment against SOC 2 best practices, and the output of that gap assessment is a report that tells you how far off you are, exactly what you need to do to become compliant, and a set of recommendations on how to become compliant. And then you go into step 3, which is ultimately going through and remediating all of those issues that we've identified to achieve SOC 2 compliance. Once you've remediated all of those issues, you're ready for an official audit. And that's when the auditor, Risk 360, will come out and look at audit evidence, do walkthroughs, document all of that stuff, and ultimately give you a formal report. So that's the 4-step process. CW, you want to talk about timeline?
This is something I always recommend to clients, don't rush it. At one level, it takes what it takes. And I know there's a lot of noise sometimes in the marketplace, like you can automate SOC 2 or get SOC 2 in 4 weeks. Frankly, that's just not feasible. SOC 2 is not something that can be automated. There are certain pieces of evidence that need to be collected, over which the automation can be built to collect that evidence. But SOC 2 is really a program, and it's a program that must be maintained by people as well as systems. So just to kind of set the record straight on that. And like Christian mentioned, the planning phase is so critical because you're basically setting the concrete foundation, for your program. And if you don't set that right, then you're going to build upon it in a way that's not going to, give you the outcomes that you desire. For initial reporting, we like to say, at least 4 to 6 months is probably a feasible time frame, depending on the maturity of the business, how much stuff is already in place. If we get into the readiness phase and we say, hey, you guys already have most of the controls implemented already, then there might just be a month or two of remediation needed, and then we can get right into reporting. In other cases where there's a lot of gaps, that's going to take a lot longer. So it really is, needs of the business and priorities of the business in terms of how long remediation takes. But that's always the piece that's the flexible piece, right? We can get through planning, we can get through readiness fairly quickly, but the remediation piece is the piece we can't control. But anyways, once remediation's done, then we get into that 4 to 6 week timeline for the actual examination and reporting itself.
Just to clarify, if you've never been through SOC 1 before, year 1 is going to be a little bit different than subsequent years. Because in year 1, that's the only year that we're going to do the readiness assessment, and you're going to need to do significant remediation. Then you're going to go for what's called a SOC 2 Type 1 report, and you might also hear Type 2 report. A Type 1 report is a point-in-time report. It means as of that day, you are compliant. The reason that you usually do a Type 1 report in your first year is because it allows you to get a report faster. Whereas a Type 2 report covers a period of time, meaning those controls have to be in place for a while. So since your controls haven't been in place, if you're doing remediation, a Type 1 report is where you start. And almost all of our clients to date, been doing this for 10 years plus, almost everyone can do that within 6 months, unless your organization is extremely complex and you have multiple business units or something like that. But you probably know that about yourself, if you think it's going to be more complex. But most companies can get through that in about 6 months. Now, year 2 is slightly different. The key to year 2, and this means that you're operating the report or operating the controls over a period of time. You've maintained those controls. What you want to do is still do planning early in the year. You got to maintain your program. You can listen to part 3 of our video series, and we talk all about maintaining a program. And then what happens is towards the end of your audit period, the auditor will come out and do all the audit efforts. So you're really going to only hear from the auditor once or twice a year. And in between that time, you're going to need to maintain your program. You can have different audit periods. The most common audit period, almost every company does a 12-month, but some companies do 6-month audit periods, their first Type 2 year and other things. So if you're hearing that from an auditor, maybe you should start off with a 6-month and then move to a 12-month. That's very common. It just depends on how long you want to wait for your first Type 2 report. That'll probably be driven by your clients. Maybe they want you to get that Type 2 report a little bit quicker. So the first time you do it, you go with the 6-month.
Yeah, and I know a lot of larger companies out there, they rightly only weigh the Type 1 so much because really they want to see that those controls are operating effectively over a period of time. So really the gold standard for SOC 2 reporting is the SOC 2 Type 2. So if you are being asked for that, that's why they just want that higher level of assurance that not only are the controls in place, but they've also operated effectively over a period of time. So a typical progression would be, Type 1 report, then you do your 6-month SOC 2 Type 2. That way you get a report in hand faster, and then it becomes an annual exercise thereafter.
So if you're communicating to your board or your executive team, whoever you're reporting to, and they just want timelines, a good place to start is 6 months to get it off the ground, and then you're going to move into rolling 12 months. That's an average time set. Want to talk about effort estimates. This always comes up. So for the audit itself, who needs to be involved and how much of their time are we going to require? So these effort estimates do not include the efforts to maintain the actual program or the efforts to remediate. That is so variable, it's a little bit difficult to estimate. So what we're providing here is what can you expect to get through the audit itself on average? And there's really 5 groups that we typically interact with. and it can vary a little bit depending on the organization structure. But we almost always deal with leadership. That can be your head of security. Sometimes it's the executive team. It just depends on how large your organization is. We typically need 2 to 4 hours of their time. The types of activities that they do are walkthroughs. We want to hear from them about the governance structure, their commitment to security. They may need to provide us evidence, for example, meeting minutes or something like that, but it's typically limited to walkthroughs. And then we have the security and GRC team. This is security is probably obvious. GRC is maybe the project manager or the people charged with maintaining your compliance program. They typically own the lion's share of the work because they're probably coordinating a big swath of the audit. Again, they're charged with walkthroughs, evidence gathering, and the additional burden of coordination of the audit if they're the ones who own the compliance program itself. Information technology, you could think about things like deploying laptops, access controls, the whole set of things that IT does. They have a fairly large burden, typically between 8 and 16 hours. There'll be a handful of walkthroughs, and they'll be charged with a lot of evidence gathering for the audit. Engineering, if you have a product company and you're doing software development, they'll be charged with things like SDLC, change management, change tickets, that whole ecosystem. Probably about 4 or 8 hours of their time. There will be a fair amount of evidence gathering because we'll probably want evidence of how they follow their change management process. And finally, there's kind of an other category where I would put HR, legal, procurement, facilities, etc. in there. 5 to 10 hours of their time. You could think about things like employee onboarding and offboarding, maybe contract reviews or customer communication. If physical security is in scope with you and we need to visit because you have an on-prem data center or some activity you're doing is critical to your on-site location, you might need to get facilities involved. But on average, that's about how much effort you can expect to get through the audit and the parties that will be involved. This is the last piece here. We're going to do a quick framework overview. Now, if you want the detailed framework overviews, part 4 of this video series is a high-level framework overview where we'll talk about it in human readable format and you'll cover big swaths. That's probably the video I recommend for most people. It'll give you a really good understanding of the framework itself. But if you want an extremely detailed review of the framework, requirement by requirement, I spent about an hour and a half recording a video in one take where we cover the whole framework, and it's more than you'll ever need. So check out videos 4 and 5 if you want those details, but we'll give you a quick overview here. So CW, maybe want to talk about the first 3 or so, and then I'll cover the next ones.
Yeah, sure. So again, this is just a high-level overview. If you look at any security or reporting framework around security, you'll notice that this is common, right? These are SOC 2 refers to these as these categories as common controls, common criteria, because every SOC report is going to at least include these as a security baseline. Then there are others that may be applicable as well, but when you think of building a security program and kind of those fundamental things that are important at a baseline level, it's governance, right? So Christian talked about us, meeting with leadership. That's very important to have leadership buy-in for a program to be successful. So there are some controls around, leadership, governance, how the organization is structured. From an HR security perspective, things that are important for SOC 2, things like background checks, onboarding, offboarding controls, performance review. How is management incentivizing the team and providing them feedback, internal communication type stuff.
And a lot of times that's surprising too, like HR, people don't think about background checks or onboarding, offboarding, or performance reviews. That trips a lot of companies up. So that stuff is included in SOC 2.
Yep. Then we go into asset management. It's everything from physical assets to digital assets, making sure those are assigned to people, managed. Ensuring that there's not shadow IT going on with a bunch of assets that are in place as part of the system but unmanaged. So those are very important topics for which there will be controls designed.
Yep, sure can. So access control, this is probably a little more intuitive. So things like administrative access, principles of least privilege access, things that commonly trip up companies, or just inventorying your systems, all the SaaS applications that everyone uses, and doing access reviews, making sure that, for example, terminated users don't have access, or a random person that you assign temporary access still has access. So that will trip companies up. Physical security, less and less in scope because so many companies are either moving to the cloud or completely virtual. But if you do anything important on site, like you have a data center or maybe you have a call center or something like that, physical security could be in scope. So we'd be looking for stuff like locked doors, security cameras, data center management. Into network security, that's perimeter security type stuff. So firewall, routers, switches, IDS, IPS. Even if you don't have a traditional network and you're using something like AWS or Microsoft 365 or the Google Suite, we'll still think about that overall perimeter security and maybe email security, how you're controlling that. Running into change control and SDLC. So your SDLC process, whether you're on DevOps, if you're using Agile or Scrum, or you're just a traditional waterfall shop, however you're doing product management, and you need to define that, have policies around it, and be following it consistently. Documentation sometimes trips up companies in terms of they're doing a lot of changes, but maybe they're not documenting that all the time. So change management.
Obviously very important, how issues are reported, whether internal, external, how those are triaged, how action is taken, how things are documented, how root cause analysis is done. So the life cycle of that for business continuity, disaster recovery, not just IT systems, but the business in general, how planning is done for that, and then monitoring everything from periodic security assessments to tools in place.
Okay, if you're ready to get started with SOC 2 and you want to kind of know where you're at, what your gaps might be, how to build out a program, we've spent the last 5 years creating a tool and we're making it available for free to everyone. So you can go over to phalanxgrc.com and you can sign up for our platform and it'll take you through a guided self-assessment process. It'll take you through a gap assessment, ask you a bunch of questions. It'll generate a report card off of those questions and with recommendations, and then import that into a project management feature, and you can start managing and fixing issues right away. This is all for free. So Risk 360 is also a SOC 2 audit firm, so we can help you out with your SOC 2 report, but we've created this platform just to help companies get security programs off the ground. We also have a ton of resources, so you can go to Risk 360 and visit our resource center. And we have videos, white papers, a whole playbook on SOC 2. So anything that you want to know about SOC 2, or if you want to go ahead and start assessing your company today for free, you can do that. We also have the next 4 parts in this video series where we'll continue to dive deep in SOC 2. So thanks for watching.